Imagine a man so obsessed with fantasy that he loses all grip on reality. And somehow, in losing it, he becomes the most human character in all of literature. He dresses in rusty armor. He charges at windmills because he believes they are giants. He recruits a confused, chubby farmer as his faithful squire. He calls a simple country girl the most beautiful noblewoman in the world. And yet, despite everything, you don't laugh at him. You root for him. That man is Don Quixote, and the novel that carries his name, written over 400 years ago by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, is not just a story, it is the first modern novel ever written. It changed the course of literature forever, and it still speaks to something deep inside every single one of us. This is the story of a man who chose to believe in a better world, and what that cost him. We begin in a small, dusty village in the region of La Mancha in central Spain, sometime in the late 16th century. There lives a man in his 50s, thin, pale, and unremarkable in almost every way. His name is Alonso Quijano. He is a minor nobleman of little wealth, no particular ambitions, and one dangerous obsession. He reads books about knights, not occasionally, obsessively. Day and night, week after week, he consumes every chivalric romance he can find. Tales of brave knights slaying dragons, rescuing damsels, dueling villains, and winning eternal glory. He reads so much and sleeps so little that slowly and completely his mind breaks. And one morning, Alonso Quijano wakes up, and he is no longer Alonso Quijano. He is Don Quixote de la Mancha, knight-errant of the ages. He has given himself a noble name, polished an old set of battered armor, and decided with total sincerity that the world is full of wrongs, and that he is the man chosen by fate to right them all. He sets off from his village on his old, bony horse, a horse he names Rocinante, which roughly means former nag turned noble steed. It's a ridiculous name for a ridiculous horse on a ridiculous quest, except Don Quixote doesn't see it that way at all. To him, every step is heroic. After a disastrous first outing, during which Don Quixote gets himself beaten, humiliated, and has to be carried home, he returns with a plan. Every great knight, he reasons, needs a squire. He recruits his neighbor, a round, simple, endlessly practical farmer named Sancho Panza. Sancho is everything Don Quixote is not. He's grounded, he's hungry, he thinks about food, sleep, and his donkey far more than he thinks about glory. He follows Don Quixote partly because he's been promised, without any real reason to believe it, that he will one day be made governor of an island. Together, this pair becomes one of the greatest double acts in all of fiction, and their relationship is the emotional engine of the entire book.
The adventures that follow are both hilarious and heartbreaking in equal measure. In the most famous scene of the entire novel, Don Quixote spots a row of windmills in the distance. To any sane person, they're just windmills. But to Don Quixote, they are enormous, terrifying giants, and he charges at them full speed on horseback, lance in hand. He crashes violently. He's thrown from his horse. He lies in the dust. And then, completely unbowed, he explains to Sancho that an evil enchanter must have turned the giants into windmills just as he attacked, to rob him of his glory. This is the scene that gave us the phrase, tilting at windmills, the act of fighting enemies that don't exist. But Cervantes is doing something far more layered here. He's not just mocking Don Quixote. He's asking, what does it mean to believe in something so completely that the facts don't change your mind? Again and again, Don Quixote encounters the real world and transforms it in his imagination. A rundown roadside inn becomes a magnificent castle. A flock of sheep becomes an enemy army. A barber's basin becomes the legendary golden helmet of Mambrino. A string of prisoners in chains becomes a group of innocent men who deserve to be freed, and when he frees them, they beat him and run away. Each adventure ends roughly the same way. Don Quixote is battered, confused, and absolutely convinced that the problem is not his perception. It's enchantment, it's enemies, it's the universe conspiring against him. Cervantes published Part 1 of the novel in 1605, and it became a sensation across Spain and Europe. Then, a decade later, he published Part 2, and he did something almost miraculous. In Part 2, the characters inside the story know about Part 1. They've read it. They recognize Don Quixote as a famous madman. And suddenly, the book becomes something stranger and richer. A story that knows it's a story. Characters who know they are characters. A powerful duke and duchess, enchanted by Don Quixote's fame, decide to play an elaborate game with him. They set up fake chivalric quests, dress their servants as characters from knightly tales, and watch with amusement as Don Quixote navigates their illusions. They even make Sancho the governor of a fake island, an actual town, as a joke. But the joke lands differently than they expect. Sancho Panza, the simple farmer, turns out to be a remarkably wise and just governor. He solves disputes fairly, he rules with common sense and humility. He becomes, in his brief time in power, a better leader than almost anyone else in the book. The fool confounds the sophisticated. The simple man reveals the shallow cruelty of the learned. By the end of the novel, Don Quixote has been defeated, in an actual duel, by a friend disguised as a knight, who forces him to agree to return home and abandon his life of adventure for 1 full year. Don Quixote goes home. He falls ill, and as he lies in bed, feverish and spent, something shifts in him. His mind clears. He wakes up, and he is Alonso Quijano again, clear-eyed, lucid, and sad. He renounces his madness. He denounces the books of chivalry that destroyed his reason. He asks for forgiveness and makes his peace. And then he dies, quietly and with dignity. Sancho weeps at his bedside and begs him not to give up, not to stop being Don Quixote. It is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in all of literature, because by the end, the man who was mocked for his delusions has become more real, more noble, and more beloved than anyone who mocked him. And when the dream ends, the world seems smaller for it.
Don Quixote was written in 1605, more than 400 years ago, and yet it feels urgently, almost uncomfortably modern. We live in a world saturated with constructed realities. We build identities around ideas we've absorbed from screens, from social media, from stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. We filter what we see through what we want to believe. We charge at windmills every single day, political, personal, professional, absolutely convinced that the giants are real. Cervantes understood something profound, that the line between visionary and madman is thinner than we like to admit. Every person who ever changed the world was told at some point that they were tilting at windmills, and many people who ruined their lives were absolutely certain they were on a noble quest. Don Quixote also asks us what we lose when we finally grow up and surrender our ideals to practicality. Alonso Quijano, cured of his madness, is arguably a lesser being than Don Quixote, lost in his dreams. There is a cost to disenchantment. There is something that dies in us when we stop believing the world can be different from what it is. And then there is Sancho Panza, the man who started the journey as a fool chasing empty promises and ended it as the wisest person in the room. The novel says reality matters, groundedness matters, but so does the courage to imagine something better. The tension between those two things, that is the human condition, and Cervantes mapped it more precisely than almost anyone who came after him. Don Quixote is not really a story about a madman. It is a story about all of us. It asks, What do you believe in strongly enough to look ridiculous for? What giants have you invented? What beauty have you projected onto something plain? And if someone proved you wrong, completely, undeniably wrong, would you be grateful or would you grieve? Cervantes gave us a character who chose an impossible dream, held it until it nearly killed him, and then let it go. And in letting it go, became fully human for the first and last time. The books of chivalry that drove Alonso mad are long forgotten, but Don Quixote rides on, because unlike the giants he imagined, the questions he raised are very, very real. If you've never read Don Quixote, start. The Windmills are waiting.